Alright, Harry Potter fans, it's time to finally address the hippogriff in the room. J.K. Rowling likes to borrow. Like, a lot. While the Harry Potter books and movies may not reach Quentin Tarantino levels of outright theft disguised as homage, it doesn't take an Auror to see that Rowling's wizarding world contains more than a few familiar elements. Voldemort, Dumbledore, Dementors, Hogwarts. None of them are original. Every single one has a direct ancestor that came first, and in some cases, Rowling didn't change a single detail. Here's exactly what she borrowed, who she borrowed it from, and the one time the copy was genuinely better than the original. Harry Potter didn't create the Dark Lord. Tolkien did, and he did it 43 years earlier. Sauron doesn't have a body. He can't fully exist in the physical world. His power is split into a physical object. His name is so feared that the people living under his shadow refuse to say it out loud. Sound familiar? It should be, because Voldemort hits every single one of those beats. Disembodied? Check. Power anchored in physical objects? Check. A name no one will speak? Check-a-rooney. If you put the two descriptions side by side without the names attached, you'd struggle to tell them apart. But here's where it gets interesting. And I prepare for angry responses from Hobbit lovers everywhere. Because Rowling didn't just copy Tolkien, she quietly improved on him. Sauron has no backstory. He's evil because evil exists. Voldemort is a traumatized orphan, unloved from birth, raised in a system that failed him, and he still chose to become a monster. That's the difference. That's a fundamentally more frightening villain, and it came from a story supposedly written for children. The most terrifying Dark Lord in children's fiction is basically Sauron with no nose and a psychology degree. And if Rowling borrowed the villain this completely, what else did she take? How about the mentor who dies halfway through and leaves the hero completely alone? That's not a plot twist. That's one of the oldest storytelling moves in existence. And Tolkien also used it first. Gandalf is eccentric, all-knowing, and strategically vague. He has information Frodo needs and routinely chooses not to share it. He dies in the middle of the story, forcing the hero to continue without him.
Fly, you fools!
Then he comes back, changed, quieter, carrying the weight of what he now knows. Dumbledore does all of this. Eccentric, strategically withholding, dies in book 6, leaves Harry a mission he only half explained. The structure is identical, all except the resurrection part. There is no Dumbledore the White. But there's a detail people miss. Both mentors hide information on purpose, and both of them are right to. Gandalf knows that Frodo has to carry the ring himself. Dumbledore knows that Harry has to be willing to die. Neither man can hand over that realization. The hero has to arrive at it alone. That's not lazy writing borrowed from Tolkien. That's Rowling knowing exactly why Tolkien's version worked, and doing the same thing on purpose. Dumbledore knowing about the Horcruxes for years and saying nothing isn't a plot hole. It's the oldest mentor playbook in modern fantasy. See also, Obi-Wan, I know Darth Vader is your father, but I'll lie to you anyway and wait for your dad to tell you himself after I die, Kenobi. The villain and the mentor are borrowed from the same source. But Tolkien isn't the oldest thing Rowling reached back to. For our next couple of examples, Rerun Rowling went back 2,000 years and pulled directly from ancient Greece. And in at least one case, she didn't even change the mechanics. Fluffy is Cerberus. 3 heads, guards a threshold that leads somewhere mortals aren't supposed to go, and can only be put to sleep by music. In the original myth, Orpheus puts Cerberus to sleep with a lyre to reach the underworld. In Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid's flute does the same job. Same creature, same weakness, same function in the story. Rowling just gave him a friendlier name and a half-giant owner. Dementors run even deeper. The Greeks had what's called the keres, spirits of violent death that drained the life and warmth from their victims, brought cold wherever they moved, and left survivors hollow. That's a Dementor. That's the exact description of a Dementor. Here's the part that changes how you read the whole thing. Rowling confirmed that Dementors are a metaphor for clinical depression, the inability to feel joy, the cold, the sense that happiness never existed. What she didn't say is that the ancient Greeks were apparently describing the same psychological experience 2,000 years before anyone had a word for it. If Socrates had just invented Prozac, the ancient Greeks wouldn't have needed half of their myths. The Greeks invented Dementors. Rowling just gave them cloaks, a name, and a chocolate-based cure. Rowling borrowed creatures from 2,000-year-old mythology, and you didn't even notice, did you? Oh, you did? Well, fine, smarty pants. Do you want to narrate the video? Yeah, I didn't think so. Maybe don't be so smug next time I ask you a question. Now, to discuss the great Hogwarts heist. In 1974, 23 years before Harry Potter existed, a British author named Jill Murphy published a children's book about a clumsy, dark-haired misfit who attends a boarding school for young witches and wizards. The students fly on broomsticks. The teachers are strict and demanding. The protagonist doesn't quite fit in, struggles to keep up, and spends most of the story trying to prove she belongs. Sound familiar? That book is called The Worst Witch, and it is structurally identical to Harry Potter in every way that matters. Not necessarily the specific plot, but the bones, the institution, the atmosphere, the social dynamics, the misfit at a magical school premise. Murphy built that entire framework in 1974, and Rowling has acknowledged knowing the book. What she's never done is directly address why the two are so similar. Here's the big difference between Harry Potter and The Worst Witch, though. The Worst Witch stayed small. Murphy never built mythology around her world. No deeper lore, no escalating stakes, no war between good and evil underneath the school story. And while The Worst Witch has been adapted for live action a few times, most famously in a 1986 TV movie starring Fairuza Balk, Rowling's Worst Witch-inspired Harry Potter saga is the stronger story. Inspired several movies, a play, spin-offs, and an upcoming streaming series. Rowling's copy didn't just replicate the original. It surpassed it, put a pillow over its face as it slept, and buried it in the morning. If Jill Murphy had a better publisher and a bigger vision in 1974, we'd be talking about Mildred Hubble instead of Harry Potter. That's not an insult to Rowling. It's the most honest thing you can say about how influence actually works. Everything so far has been Rowling borrowing from other writers. This next one is different, because the object at the center of the entire first book isn't something she invented. It actually exists. The Philosopher's Stone is a genuine medieval concept, a mythical substance believed to transmute base metals into gold and, more importantly, grant its owner immortality. This wasn't fringe thinking. This was the thing serious, educated people spent their entire lives trying to do. Isaac Newton spent more time on alchemy than he did on physics. Nicolas Flamel is also real. He was a French scribe born in 1330 who became one of the most famous alleged alchemists in history. The rumor, taken seriously enough to persist for centuries, was that Flamel had actually found the stone, achieved immortality, and faked his own death. His grave in Paris was reportedly opened and found empty. There is a street named after him in Paris today. In other words, Rowling didn't invent Nicolas Flamel or the Philosopher's Stone while sitting in the loo one day. She took a real man, a real legend, and a real historical obsession and wrote them into chapter 13 of her YA fantasy novel as if they'd always belonged there. The idea to do so may still have come to her while she was in the bathroom. However, she's certainly never contradicted it. The fictional Nicolas Flamel you met as a kid has a street named after him in Paris. That detail alone should change how you read the entire first book. Rowling drew from mythology, medieval history, and Tolkien, as well as several other influences. Star Wars. Neil Gaiman's The Book of Magic. And then, once her books hit 1 billion in sales, everyone else started doing the same thing to her. The Circle of Life and whatnot. Rick Riordan published Percy Jackson, The Lightning Thief, in 2005, 8 years after Philosopher's Stone. And the structural overlap is immediate. Orphan protagonist discovers he's secretly the child of an extraordinarily powerful figure. He's brought to a hidden institution where others like him are trained. There is a prophecy centered specifically on him. He has a loyal trio, including a girl who is clearly the most competent of the three. The antagonist is a dark figure seeking immortality and dominion over the living world. I mean, that is Harry Potter. Scene for scene, beat for beat, that is the exact same scaffold. But here's what stops Percy Jackson from being a straight copy. Riordan replaced the invented magic system with Greek mythology. And that decision changes everything. Rowling may have cribbed a couple ideas from the ancient Greeks, but Riordan took everything. Every monster Percy fights, every god he meets, every location he visits is drawn from a body of mythology that actually exists. The story has footnotes. You can fact-check it. Rowling built a world you escape into. Riordan built a world that sends you back to the library. That distinction is why Percy Jackson survived long enough to become its own franchise rather than a footnote. It took Harry Potter's structure and gave it an entirely different engine. But Percy Jackson isn't the biggest borrower of Rowling's ideas. That honor goes to the magicians. Most franchises that borrow from Harry Potter at least pretend they didn't borrow from it. Lev Grossman didn't even bother to do that. Grossman published The Magicians in 2009 and has openly acknowledged in interviews that Harry Potter was the starting point. Brakebills University is Hogwarts for adults. Competitive entry, specialized disciplines, a chosen student narrative, a Dark Lord equivalent operating just outside the edges of the safe magical world. The framework is identical, and Grossman has never once tried to deny it. Intellectual property theft. Talk about gross, man. But here's where The Magicians becomes genuinely interesting. Grossman didn't just copy the framework, he deconstructed it. What happens to the chosen one when the adventure is over and ordinary life resumes? What if magic didn't make you special? It just gave you more sophisticated ways to self-destruct. What if the Dark Lord had a legitimate grievance? Grossman took every comforting assumption from the Harry Potter premise and just took it apart, piece by piece. The Magicians is what happens when you ask what Harry Potter would look like if the Chosen One had a personality disorder and the Dark Lord had a point. The answer is that it would look a lot like a 3-season sci-fi original series, apparently. That's not plagiarism. That's criticism written in novel form. And it's arguably the most intellectually honest response to Harry Potter that anyone has produced. And yes, that includes YouTube essays where the host addresses the camera directly while wearing a Gryffindor jumper and holding a Hedwig plushie. The Magicians works because it takes the fantasy of Harry Potter seriously enough to question whether the fantasy is actually true. Every story Harry Potter borrowed from had one thing the books never fully explored. What happens to the bloodlines after the story ends? The next video on this channel maps every future family tree in the wizarding world, and some of those connections change how you read the entire series.